Good morning, everybody. My name is Pam Lack. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Digital Humanities Librarian here at San Diego State. And you're here for our workshop, Voyant for Text Analysis. And just a big thank you before we begin to Dr. Jessica Pressman. This is actually her class, English 562. And she's graciously allowed us to open this session up to the public to learn about Voyant for text analysis. I've got a bunch of links that I put in the chat, but for those of you who arrived after those links were put in, either Dr. Pressman or Brianne are going to help me add those links in the chat throughout the session. They're going to help me moderate. Before we begin, I just want to start with our SDSU land acknowledgement, since not everybody in the virtual space here is familiar with that. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been a part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the San Diego State community, we acknowledge this legacy, we promote this balance and harmony, we find inspiration from this land, the land of the Kumeyaay. So welcome to the Virtual Digital Humanities Center. For some of you, it might be your first time joining us virtually. For others, you might have come to several of our other virtual programs, including our virtual book talks, our virtual workshops, all of that. The center is currently closed due to the pandemic, but we are engaging in a lot of different virtual programs this semester to stay connected and help you with your critical digital engagement. And there's a link to our Teaching During Quarantine website, which Dr. Pressman put together with our help, that has all of our programs for the fall. And if you've missed anything, whenever available, we have the recording up on that website as well. We aren't recording all of our events, but anything that is recorded is being posted there for later access. So before I begin, just one procedural. This link, this tiny URL, is actually the link to the slides for today, which have a lot of links in and of themselves, and also have some texts that you can actually play with today in this session. And so everything you need for today is there. So feel free to pull up the slides and follow along or download them to your computer. Okay, so what are we going to be doing today? We're going to start with a broad introduction to computational text analysis before we dive into the actual tools, Voyant tools. And then we'll talk about how to use Voyant, how to prepare text, get text into Voyant, what you're seeing when you load Voyant, and then how you customize and refine your results and change the different tools, what Voyant calls the skins, and then how you might share those results. I am going to do my darndest to make sure there's time for hands-on, and so that I'm not talking the whole time. Sometimes I run out of time for that, but I really want y'all to get a feel for it. And I also want us to engage in some reflections about computational text analysis as well. Please feel free to share questions in the chat. As well, if you're not a member of the English 562 community, feel free to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're coming from, why you're here. I can't monitor chat in real time, but I will download it and read it after the fact. So to begin with.
Pam, Paige would like to know if you have a hat for today.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Sorry, I forgot about this. Okay, here we go. My actual dragon hat.
Now we're ready to go.
I apologize for forgetting my dragon hat. Okay, yeah, now we're ready. So I want to start with a poll. Because not everybody is a member of this class, I'm curious what brings you all here today. So let me figure out, where's my poll? Oh, there we go. All right, I'm about to launch a poll just to get a sense of how familiar you might be with computational text analysis before we even start talking about it. So I'm going to launch it real quick and let me know how you feel, what your experience is with text analysis. And I'll just keep it open. We're almost at 100%. I'll keep it open for another maybe 5 or 6 seconds, since I don't want to spend too much time. Okay. Oh, and we're at about 100% because I'm not voting. All right. So let's take a look. Can everybody see my poll results? I'm not sure. At any rate, so how familiar are you with computational text analysis? 22% have never heard of it, so that's great that you're here. 41% have heard of it but never tried it. About 19% have given it a try, 15% do it from time to time, and one person in our virtual room says they're a pro at it. So, and I didn't vote, but I would not put myself in the pro category. So whoever the pro is, we might be calling on you during this session, but thank you all for joining us. So to begin with, many of you have heard of it. Very few of you have done it. What do we think of when I say text analysis? What does that mean? And feel free to unmute yourself or put it in chat.
We have to think of sort of data mining or looking at text to see if there are hidden patterns or connections.
That's great. Thanks, Kate. Let's take a step back and take the computer out of that picture. How would we, what would we think of as sort of human-driven text analysis?
I think of close reading. So, interpreting the text by manually going through and making connections.
Right, right. So that's a great definition, sort of close reading. And once upon a time, we did that with our eyes. We did it manually, and it was laborious. It is still laborious, even with computers, just in a different way. And to Kate's point, now we can think about doing it at a greater scale. So now with the use of computers, just make this smaller. We can use computers to help us process more text, to ask new questions of our texts, and assist us with sense making, what Franco Moretti referred to as distant reading. But I want to emphasize now and throughout this session, this does not replace human reading. So we're not talking about computers reading texts. We're talking about computers facilitating human reading of texts. And I hope that becomes clear as we go along. And I apologize, I'm going to take the dragon hat off because I'm a little warm. I'll bring them back for parts of the session. Okay. So there's a lot of different ways that we can think of text analysis. And many of you have probably seen a word cloud before. And this is one of the most basic forms of computational text analysis, where we pump some text in and a computer visualizes what's called term frequencies. So the more common a term is in the document, the bigger it is. So this is a word cloud of my dissertation. And if you look at this, you can begin to maybe make a guess about what my dissertation was about. If you look at some of the most commonly occurring terms in the text, and if anyone wants to take a stab at it who hasn't seen this word cloud before, because I use my dissertation as the example often. Any guesses about what my dissertation? All right, so somebody Jack says in the chat, Hollywood musicals, exactly. And it's actually even more specific than that, the post-war period here, roughly 1944-ish to 1945 to 1958 or so. Okay. There's a lot more complex kind of computational text analysis processes out there that use what we call natural language processing to do a whole bunch of a lot more sophisticated things than just show you term frequency. So it might help us find patterns of recurring words or co-located words, that is, words that are that appear next to or near each other. We could use NLP or natural language processing to engage in things like sentiment analysis to extract emotions from a text or the description of emotions. It's not that the text is feeling anything. We can perform named entity recognition or NER, where we're pulling out people's names or place names. We could look at parts of speech and do analyses of these if that's important to us. And we can also engage in topic modeling, which is a statistical or a probabilistic method for clustering terms. And essentially what you do is you pump a bunch of text into a topic modeling tool like Mallet, and it clumps the words together And then from there, you have to find the common theme in that bucket of words. And you figure out what those topics might be. And then use that as a way to drive your analysis, your close reading, additional research questions that you might have about a text or a set of texts. Any questions about any of that before we proceed? Okay, not seeing anything coming in chat, I'll proceed. I want to show you a couple of examples. One is, the top one is from Yale Digital Humanities Lab. It's called Robots Reading Vogue. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of text analyses and visualizations of digitized copies of Vogue magazine. So you can see here, there's a topic modeling set of visualizations. There's work that students are doing. There's analyses of covers, of the Ngram, which is term frequency. So it's kind of a fun topic. And then at the bottom, out of the University of Richmond's Digital Scholarship Lab, one of their oldest projects is Mining the Dispatch, which was a text mining project of digitized newspapers, both from Richmond, from the Confederacy, and compared that to the New York Times out of the Union during the Civil War. So you can see here, they're showing different kinds of trends along, I think it's a 4 or 5 year period that they analyzed, and in their advertisements, what kinds of topics they were seeing. So they weren't just text mining the actual articles, but the ads as well. And of course, back then the ads would have been print. So I'm going to ask a set of questions that are going to guide us throughout this session. And we can begin to talk about these questions now, but I hope that by the end of the session, we can dive into these a little bit more. So you might already be able to see some of the affordances of text analysis. And I think after playing with Voyant, you might see even more. But I also want us to be thinking of and mindful of some of the limitations and unintended consequences of text mining. So what might we lose by engaging in this kind of approach? And how might we mitigate against those problems? So if anyone has any preliminary thoughts before we dive into the specifics, this would be a great time to share those ideas. But again, these are going to be sort of our guiding questions for the next hour. I see something coming in chat. And Dr. Pressman is reminding her students about Joanna Drucker's work on how images have a point of view.
I think one of the limitations is if you're looking at terms and frequency and some of the other computational abilities of the text, you lose the fact that there are meanings that are only made in the human mind when you read. Metaphors and things that can't be quantified if you're not actually a human looking at the text.
Right. That's a really good point, Kate. So there are things that a computer can be very good at doing and processing and things that it's not good at. So thinking about imagery, metaphors, things like that. And that's certainly true. We can also think about the fact that most natural language processing uses modern day training sets. So the Stanford NLP tools, which are one of the most commonly ones used, use like contemporary newspapers. But if you're using these tools on older texts, say 19th century texts, how has language changed over time? And is the tool that you're using equipped for the time period you're working in? So for literary scholars, this could be a potential issue. And this is something I struggled with as well. And I see, Melissa, you have a question, so please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Oh, yeah, about the limitations, I really like to use Wordles, but Wordles are no longer supported except by like a very specific browser of Mozilla Firefox. And so in trying to find other tools that might do something similar, I found other word cloud generators, but then the way that they sort of filter words prompted me to ask questions about, well, for example, maybe it's not frequency, but it might do it by relevance. And it made me wonder, how are they deciding what is relevant?
Yes.
So those kinds of questions.
Yes. So Melissa, thank you so much. This is a fantastic segue into actually talking about Voyant. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time to talk about relevance. I'm trained as both a historian and an information scientist. And in studying information science, learned about what relevance means from an information retrieval perspective, which is using a lot of the same algorithms, and NLP borrows from information retrieval. So I would be happy to have an offline conversation with you about relevance, but you're right, that's who gets to decide what's relevant, and what's relevant to you in reading a text might not be relevant to me. I've had this interesting experience during the pandemic of picking up books I read 20 or 30 years ago, and I love to write in my books. And I was shocked by some of the things I found profound enough to underline and comment on when I was, 20, 30 years ago, that now I open the book and I'm like, why did I think this was significant? Why did I think this was relevant? How did this speak to me at all? So in many ways, that significance and that relevance is in the eye of the reader. So just in the interest of time, I'm going to continue, but please continue putting ideas in chat. And Brianne, thank you so much for offering to answer specific NLP questions. Brianne's probably more of an expert in NLP than is more of an expert in NLP than I am. So thank you so much. Okay, so let's talk about Voyant. And this is a great segue because Melissa, you can actually use Voyant for these word clouds, and you can customize them to sort of shape what you're seeing in your cloud. So Voyant is a browser-based free tool, you don't have to download it, that allows you to computationally process large amounts of text, what we might consider a corpus or multiple corpora, to produce a series of analyses and visualizations that can aid you in your analysis and your close reading. So you would use Voyant for that distant reading to then hone in on your close reading. So what you need beyond internet connection and a browser is a corpus, and that can be a single plain text document, or it can be a lot of documents combined. You might want to be looking at the entire works of one author, or you might want to mix and match works from different authors of a time period or a genre, say the Romantics or something like that. And so you would get your text and you would put it into Voyant and you would start to explore. So I'm going to pause right there really quickly and just share a few quick thoughts about text itself. So in order for Voyant or any kind of text analysis tool to work, you need what we would consider machine-ready text or machine-readable text. I don't like to say machine-readable because that suggests the machine is reading. The computer, it does not read. It is processing the text for you to read. And it's important to note that not all digitized text is machine-ready or machine readable. Some of it might be text that documents that were digitized a long time ago and do not have what's called optical character recognition, or OCR. OCR is the process whereby these texts can be readable if they're not modern texts, things that we're producing now, say Word docs. They are sort of, the OCR is already like built in there because they're born digital. But not all digitized text will be. And unfortunately, one of the leading OCR tools, Abby Fine Reader, is not actually free. You can do a free trial. There are free options out there, but they're likely going to be noisy. And then we have to think about the limits on what's OCRable. So handwriting is a very difficult thing to OCR, and there are supercomputer centers trying to solve that problem right now and have been for decades. Images obviously are going to be very hard to OCR because they're not text-based, although you might be able to OCR the text represented in an image. And then older print fonts. Back in my days at UNC Chapel Hill, we were working on digitized copies of city directories in North Carolina. And we found that the OCR was incredibly messy because of the print. And so it was the results were constantly confused and messy. And so we would have to go in and do a lot of hand cleaning of the text before we could do anything with it. So it's always best if you use you get plain text documents. These are optimal because they're interoperable, which means nearly any system will be able to read a .txt file. It means that all document formatting has been stripped. So if you think about a Word document, there's no bold, there's no bullets, it's just the text and the punctuation. If you're grabbing stuff from the web, what that would mean is stripping away what you can't see, which are the HTML elements, the CSS, or the XML. And these are things that we don't see them when we're looking at a web page, but they're all there, and that's what allows for that formatting. Once you've done that, there's still probably a lot of cleaning that goes into preparing text for analysis, including stripping additional content, such as page headers, page numbers, and doing spot checking that OCR. As you'll see, I'm going to use the example of my dissertation throughout this training. I didn't bother to actually do that kind of cleaning. So it has my bibliography in there, and it has my footnotes. And there's a lot of good, important information and words in my footnotes, but there's also a lot of citations that are noisy for my text analysis. And I'll show you that in real time. Oops. And then here are a few links to where you can find free public domain text corpora. But each of these have limits. So HathiTrust, you'll have the limit of if your library doesn't subscribe, you can only get the things that are actually in the public domain, and you might not actually be able to download the text, but you can certainly search. Digital Public Library of America is a really great collection of primary sources, but it has a lot of images and only excerpts of text as far as I can tell. The Gale Digital Scholar Lab is a set of text analysis tools to be applied to all of their digital collections, digitized newspapers and things like that. But your library needs to subscribe both to the databases and to the actual text analysis tools, which our library does not because it's at this point prohibitively expensive. You can also look for libraries that subscribe to the philosophy of collections as data, which was a grant-funded program that started out of UC Santa Barbara several years ago, as well as UPenn. And this was an effort by libraries and archives and museums to make their digitized collections machine ready so that you could then grab their content and start playing with it, start analyzing it. Collections as data is not a sort of an organization, and it does not have a sort of list, an aggregated list of participating libraries, but they did just come out with stickers that mine is on en route. So they're starting to become a thing, and I think we're going to see more libraries buying into this philosophy of collections as data. So finding the text can be a little tricky. Okay, I'm just going to pause. I see a lot of chat. There is stuff in archive.org. Thank you, Larry, for reminding me of that. That's the Internet Archive. And yes, the OCR can be very unreliable. So you're still probably going to have to do quite a bit of cleaning.
Two quick questions I wanted to comment on. One is, and this was asked last time we had a Voyant workshop, is that Voyant is a language agnostic tool. So it can function with text in pretty much any language, although there are a couple of features such as tokenization that are going to be language dependent that you might have to fiddle with in order to get them to work. The other question is more of a thing to keep in mind when we do talk about cleaning and prepping data. We should always be critical about the steps that we're taking to prepare that data and how that might affect the conclusions we can take from it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I do have a note in here about the language agnosticism of Voyant. But yeah, it's always important that to understand, and the students in Dr. Pressman's class know this, right? That the choices we make in where we get the data and how we prepare it are going to shape our results, right? And we just need to be aware of that, and we need to make those choices visible. If we're going to use this to write some sort of article or draw conclusions, we need to make that process visible. And digital humanities is all about making the process visible. Okay, so let's talk about using Voyant. Let's actually dive in. I've put the link to the tool as well as the link to their help documentation, which is really extensive. So to begin with, there's a couple different ways that you can load. So what I'm going to do is quickly run through these slides just so you see them, and these are more for future reference. And then I'm actually going to move into Voyant and actually walk you through it and then break you up into groups. So I'm going to fly through this quite quickly just to familiarize you with it before I actually do it. So you can grab online texts and put the URLs into Voyant as long as they're not behind a paywall. You can use an existing, there's two preloaded corpora, the complete works of Shakespeare or Jane Austen, if you just want to play, or you can upload your own texts. If you've got a single text file, you can put that in. If you've got a lot, you might want to zip them just for expediency. And then here's this little button. It kind of looks like a dictionary icon. That's where you would change the language. So if you're not using English text, you want to go ahead and change that language. You also might want to check it before you start working and grabbing text to make sure it supports the language you're working in. Okay, this is the initial view of Voyant after you've loaded your text. I'm going to just quickly walk you through this, and then again, I'll show it to you. So again, this panel here, number 1, this is your word cloud, which Voyant calls Cirrus. Number 2, this middle panel is your reader. This is where you see all of the text you've loaded. This is really, really helpful to be able to go back to the original text and see things in context, see what's happening. 3 is your trends or your term frequencies. And this is defaulting to here the 5 top commonly used terms in my dissertation. But I can already see that new is actually a noisy word. I know that it refers to things, New York, which is largely pulling from my citations. 4 is my general summary, where I can see that I had 135,474 total words and 11,000, almost 19 or 12,000 unique word forms. And that my vocabulary, I have an average of almost 25 words per sentence. I don't know how that compares to I've been told I'm a dense writer, and I'm working on that. And then in the 5th panel here at the bottom right is our context. And this is super powerful, right? Because what it's showing me is, I can tell it's the word dance here, and it's showing me what typically shows up right before the word and right after the word. So I can see more than just term frequency, which is helpful, but I can begin to see words in context, that is in relationship to each other. So a quick couple of things here. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you can customize and refine your results, and I'm not going to cover everything right now, but you can typically, wherever you see one of these sliders, change the number of terms or items that you're seeing. So I can set this to like 200 words if I wanted to, although then it's going to be super noisy. It'll be hard for me to see anything. I can filter out what's called stop words, and I'll talk about that in just a moment, to get rid of the noisy words. And I can perform what's called stemming and other what we call in information retrieval wildcard queries to zoom in on specific terms and patterns. And there are just a few examples here, and I've got a lot more examples elsewhere. I should also add this link here is to a standalone tutorial that Kiana Kinshasa, who worked in the Digital Humanities Center virtually in the spring and summer. She created a wonderful tutorial all about stop words and search queries, and it's available as part of our public tutorials. So you can learn more about that as well from her work. Okay, let's talk a little bit about stop words. So stop words are commonly used words and I'm just going to use the English language as an example, in the English language or in any language that don't hold a lot of meaning. So the, it, pronouns, prepositions, sometimes pronouns, depending on what it is you're doing, articles. And you can apply stop words, apply a list to remove those stop words from your analysis so that you can actually look at the words that potentially are more meaningful in your text. And you can actually edit these, and I'll demo that in just a moment. There's an option to apply globally, which I can never get to work, and I don't know what's going on. It might be my browser. So you can look here and see that in the top right, this is the original word cloud that I produced when I loaded my, with my dissertation. I set it to 75 words, and you can see here that there's a lot of words going on. And if you hover over a word, it'll show you the term frequency. So university shows up 364 times. And I know just by knowing my dissertation that that word is not meaningful. That is pulling from my bibliography of different presses and different archival collections that I used across different universities in the United States. So I applied the stop word list and then customized it with words that I knew were specific to my dissertation. And you can keep editing the word list as you go. And I can start to get a little bit more of a refined set of results that are a little bit more meaningful and have a little bit less of the noise. So I can see here the year 1956. That could potentially be a noisy word, or it could be a word or a date that is significant to my dissertation, to my text. And I'm not sure, I'd have to dig in a little bit deeper and really click on that and figure out what's going on with that year. Okay, I can also filter, say, term occurrences for specific words. So here I'm looking at dance, which occurs 754 times, and dancing, which occurs 300 times. And I'm just typing that into the search box. And it's Voyant, as you'll see, actually gives you the suggested words. It sort of does that autocomplete for you. But I can also do a thing called stemming, which is to say, I can find the root of the word. And I can actually stem so that it captures variations of the word dance. This isn't always something we want to do, but and it really depends on your context and what you're trying to do. But I can see that dance, if I just stem it at D-A-N-C and then put that little asterisk, I see there's 1,427 occurrences, and that includes dance, dancing, dancer, dances, dancers, danced, dancin'. That's actually specific to singing and dancing in the rain. That actual word, I can tell. So what it would look like to actually do that. So you would see here, you've got two separate words versus incorporating all of the different variations of dance. And again, we don't always want to do that. I can also look for pairs of words in connection to each other by using the pipe. So in this case, I might want to look for Gene Kelly as his full name rather than look for his first name and his last name. Or I could combine my pipe and my stem and look for Gene Kelly and Gene Kelly's. And let me show you what that actually would look like. So here, just looking at Gene Kelly as it appears 1,058 times, if I stem it to include Gene Kelly's, that's a slightly higher set of results. And in this case, it's probably not, it doesn't probably muddy the waters for me to do that kind of stemming. And there's a whole bunch of other kinds of things you can do that if you click on, if you look through the help doc, documentation from Voyant, you'll see. But in the interest of time, I won't show all of that. Now, in any given skin, that is any panel, here, you can change the skin. There are some that are already built in. So for instance, I can look at the links instead of the word cloud, or I can look at what's called the Termsberry, which I'll show in just a moment. But for any of those panels, I can also click on what looks like a little Windows button and pull up lots of different tools. And the tools are categorized as corpus tools, document tools, visualization tools, grid tools, and other. And some are show up in multiple. So if I know that I want to look at a visualization tool, I would click on the visualization option. So for instance, here I've moved from the word cloud to the links to look at what's called collocations, that is relationships between of high frequency terms and how they connect to others. So I can see that dance is connected to Kelly. I can also try Termsberry, which is a way to see high frequency terms and their proximity to other words. And again, if you hover over anything, you'll see more information. There's also a really lovely essay that an alum of both the DH Center and Dr. Pressman's classes wrote about using Termsberry, and I believe she filmed a little animation of Termsberry at work because it's a dynamic visualization. So you can go ahead and check that out. It's an open access article. We can turn on the steam graph, which depicts the change of word frequency across the corpus. If you're working with a set of different documents in your corpus, it would actually segment by document. So here I'm using the stemmed word dance, and I can see this is the tan, how it shows up across my dissertation. These segments are roughly corresponding to my chapters. And I only know this because I'm super familiar with the text. If I were new to this text, I'd have to go into the reader and actually see what's going on here. And I can tell this is accurate because the first part and the last part of my dissertation are all about Gene Kelly and dancing, and the middle section is more about vocalization and gender and race. The textual arc is a really interesting visualization that I cannot wrap my brain around. It's a dynamic or animated visualization of weighted terms and an arc that follows the sort of progression of words in relationship to each other as the text sort of plays. And I'll demo that in just a moment because the screenshot just doesn't do it justice. You can also try, say, a word tree that shows how different words are used in different phrases. So that again gives you more of that context and helps you hone in on specific things you might want to look at. And then this beta Dreamscape, if there is a geographic or a spatial component to your text, you can attempt the Dreamscape, where the tool tries to do what's essentially named entity recognition of place names mentioned in the texts. And try to look for some patterns of recurring connections. Now, I pulled that up on mine and I realized it's incredibly noisy because I didn't take out my bibliography, and every bibliographic entry lists the city of the publisher or the place of the archive. So I'm seeing a lot of stuff happening here that's not particularly useful to me. And I knew this because I saw the text running along the top and I realized, oh, that's my bibliography, or that's actually my introduction or something like that. And this is also an animated visualization. One of the grid tools that I like a lot is the corpus collocation that gives you a table view of words in proximity to each other. So the top one is the default one, and the bottom one is again dance stemmed, where you can see how its dance is collocated and how often. And I see dance and invitation are collocated 270 times, and that's because I talk a lot about this really terrible, well, I shouldn't say it, this movie called Invitation to the Dance. That was this artsy film that Gene Kelly tried to, that he made in the 50s that was a box office bomb. And not a cult classic. Okay, so really quickly, how do you pick a different tool? So first, as with any kind of place where you're trying to figure out something to do, you need to figure out what you're trying to do and why. What is it you're trying to do? Do you have a specific question? Are you just trying to get a feel for the corpus? Do you need to see context? Do you need to see the relationship between terms? Figure out what it is you're trying to do. And then try to figure out what type of tool you need. So do you need to see something visualized, or is a grid tool more useful? That is, you can get more granular and really see specific things. And then the lovely thing about the documentation for Voyant is it documents every single skin or tool. And so you can read up on particular tools and figure out and see examples of them and how to do it and figure out, oh, this maybe isn't relevant. And of course, number 4, which I didn't put on the slide, you can always give it a try. So you can always just play, and if you don't like it, just change it back to something else. And then finally, you can export. You can export the whole project as a URL. You can export embeddable tools or skins. You can export data or a bibliographic reference. And you can also export static PNGs or images of the visualizations. I find typically a screenshot might actually have better image quality, so I stopped doing the PNG exports. But it's built in there and you can definitely use it. Okay, I'm going to now go into Voyant. And I saw some stuff coming in chat. Are there any questions while I'm getting, you can input XML into Voyant. I don't know how it's recognizing the named entities.
Yeah, just by reading the documentation, they don't specify what algorithm they're using to do named entity recognition. A number exists, but that are of varying degrees accurate and inaccurate. The documentation does specify with the Dreamscape tool that it is fairly inaccurate and tends to produce a lot of errors. So it is kind of to be seen more as an experimental visualization than it as something to be used in maybe like a professional publication.
Thank you. Yeah. My suspicion is that they're using the Stanford Natural Language Processing Toolkit, but I don't know for sure. So let me start. So I've already loaded my text. Loading text can take a little bit of time, so I cheated and preloaded it. And I'm going to just make some of these panels or skins a little bit bigger, and you can see that it's going to adjust on the fly. And here I can up my number of terms, and as I scroll, I can see more terms, and it's telling me how many. So I want to show you the stop words. So if I hover, I can see the options button, and here it's on my auto detect stop words, but I'm going to go in and edit the list because I know that there's a whole bunch of stuff here. And as I continue adding more stop words, I can see, oh, that's another noisy word. That's a noisy word. So for me, I already have said, I know that there are certain words related to my bibliography and the provenance of archival material that I came up with, as well as press. I think largely press, I'm not sure if press is a noisy word or not. And I'm going to confirm that, and you'll see it start to change. It's going to be a little slow because it's running in Zoom. So the word box disappeared, but I can see a lot of other words. Like, I'm not sure why like is showing up. Like could potentially be a stop word. I don't know. I'm going to leave it in there. But I can see, you know, masculinity, performance, spectacle. Years is probably noisy. I see some place names. And some words that probably are still not useful to me. So for instance, like cold maybe is not a good word, or particularly, like why do I guess I use that a lot. And that's not a word that's going to be of interest to me here. So I'll remove that. So I can keep removing words, and I can change the number of terms. Now I can't customize the word cloud beyond this, like the colors or the shape or anything like that. So I can keep playing around with it till I get a shape that I like. And then I can change it to the links. And this is what I found really frustrating when I was playing with this the other day. It's not clear to me whether all of my words in my stop list are now showing up. So I'm going to go check if box is still here, and it disappeared. So then do I have to retype all of my words? That's kind of a pain. So I don't know why the global application of stop words doesn't seem to work for me. I hope that you have better luck with that. Moving over, again, this is the reader, and this is really fantastic because this is the whole text. And, you know, I can actually, as I click on something, it changes different views. And depending on what tool you're in, it may take you to that section of the reader. It depends on what you're doing. But I can also jump around to different sections. I can also search for specific things. And what you're seeing here, this little line down here, because I clicked on the word dance, I think I clicked on either invitation or dance, I'm not sure. This is showing me the term frequency in the reader. And you see how it mirrors the term frequency in this graph here. So it's all sort of reinforcing each other. And then here I can do, again, that stemming. So let's say I want to stem from, I wrote about gender, so I wrote a lot about masculinity and femininity. And you can see all of the different variations there that I use. And what's lovely about Voyant is it actually recommends the stemming. So when I took information retrieval in library school, we had to figure out what the stem was. And I never took a linguistics class, so I had no idea. But this is actually giving you the suggestion. So if I do that, I'm going to get all 190 results. And then I can do the same thing for femininity and also gender. And see the trends of those three words together. And I always marvel at this because I always think of myself as a gender historian and that I wrote about gender, but the word gender is not necessarily used as much as some of these other words. And actually, in some ways, it looks like I wrote way more about masculinity than about femininity. And that's probably because my dissertation advisor was an early historian of masculinity studies. And he greatly influenced me when I got to graduate school, which sometimes happens. All right, let me show you a few other tools and a few other customizations, and then being mindful of time, give you enough time to go into breakout rooms and try it yourself. So again, I'm going to click on this little thing that looks like a window icon, and you can see here all the different kinds of options. So for instance, I want to show you the text arc because my screenshot was just not very good. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger for y'all to see. You can move the panels around, resize them. So the dissertation is sort of playing. I'm going to speed it up a little bit here. And this is showing how the words are sort of progressing and connecting to each other across the text as we move linearly through the text. So this may be something of use. The issue I have is I don't think I can pause it, but I can I can hover and see specific things. So this one is an interesting visualization, but I never quite know how to analyze it. And some of these visualizations are like that. And maybe if I were a linguist or a literary scholar, I would know a little bit more about what to make of these visualizations. Okay, I'm just double checking. Jack asks, is it possible to flag categories of words as noisy rather than just specific words? So you work with the Text Encoding Initiative or TEI encoded words, and it would be great to be able to categorize salutation as noisy so I don't get all my results. That's a really good question, Jack. I am not sure if this tool has been built to process TEI. So I'll have to look into that and get back to you about that.
In terms of categories, though, they are, according to documentation at least, they have added, somewhat recently, they've added categories as a feature. So there is a category builder that sort of builds on top of the stop words list that will work on that. As similar to the Dreamscapes thing, expect it to be problematic and maybe not function as accurately as you might like, but it is worth, if that is something you're looking for, I would highly recommend digging into the documentation and trying it out for yourself.
Thank you so much. This is why it's always helpful to have a co-host at a workshop who can dig into the documentation and answer specific questions that I cannot do on the fly. Thank you. So here, I'm going to actually, let me just turn off that animation so it doesn't make us all go nuts. Here, I turned on my context to see, I want to see what's in context with the term gender. And notice how it sort of started jumping up in the reader because it's sort of seeking, as I click on different things, it's taking me to that part of the text or the document. So I can now actually see more of that context. So you can see here, musical motion pictures thus expand, and that's right there. Oops, I clicked away. And so that's one of the beauties of this is that it does not separate you from the actual text, the actual context. And that's really, really important because a lot of text analysis tools kind of separate you from the actual text. And I have, one of my last slides is other different text analysis tools that you can use, many of which don't let you get back to the original text. So it's hard to confirm what you're seeing. Whereas here I can actually see and go back to the actual section in the document. Okay, what I want to do right now is hit pause, see if there are specific questions, and then I want us to give it a try. So I'm actually going to put everyone into some breakout rooms and let you play with Voyant. So any questions before we break up into little groups? We're not breaking up, break out into little groups. All right, let's see what's coming in chat. And for anyone who has to leave early, this is being recorded and we'll post it on the TeachDH website as soon as it's processed, as well as the DH Initiative's YouTube channel. Okay, great. So what we're going to do is, and let me see how many folks are in the room right now. We've got about 25. So I think we'll do about maybe, well, just to make the math easy, five breakout rooms of 5 folks. So what you'll want to do is navigate to Voyant Tools. You can either use the preloaded corpus. If you have your own text that you want to use, go for it. Or if you want to use one of the ones I've provided, if you go to this tiny URL, you'll see a folder called Voyant Sample Corpus, NA Slave Narratives. These are computationally ready or machine-ready text documents of narratives written by or about enslaved people from UNC's collection of slave narratives. And if you navigate into the data folder and then into the text folder, you'll see each narrative is its own text, or you can grab a couple. So, you know, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, 12 Years a Slave, Frederick Douglass's autobiography. I think there are several in there. All sorts of good stuff there. So lots of different options, or if you want to grab something else from the web and give that a try, go for it. And what we're going to do is just spend about maybe 10 minutes in breakout rooms just experimenting. So experiment with different skins and get a feel for things. See where you run into problems and ask yourself whether you'd use something, why or why not. Okay, so let me, I'm going to actually pause the recording right now. Okay, so we're back from our breakout rooms, and I didn't have a chance to visit all the rooms, but in some of the rooms, we had some interesting conversations. And so I'm going to just flash a few sort of question that we can think of for discussion in terms of specific questions about Voyant, what we can do with it, what we can't do, how we might use it, but also thinking more broadly about computational text analysis, what we would learn by using these kinds of tools, why we might engage in it, and then returning to those even bigger questions. So I'm going to actually stop sharing for just a moment so that we can have a little bit more of a conversation. So anyone want to share their experiences working in Voyant, things you tried to do or couldn't figure out how to do, or insights you developed, or anything like that?
We talked a bit about I used Jane Austen's novels as a reference for Voyant, and I found it very interesting that the most common words were Mr., Miss, Mrs., those kind of titles. And I thought about I was curious about if those might be considered stop words, and when I added them onto the list and got rid of them, the words that took its place were very interesting. And as I thought about that more, I found it interesting how getting rid of those words gave me a different insight on why she might have used those words so often, and it was very interesting to think about.
Yeah, and as we discussed in your room, even the nature of selecting stop words is an act of sense making. And particularly, this is a really good example that these words hold a lot of meaning in Austen's writing, if you think about what the themes of her writing are. And so do we consider them stop words? What constitutes noise? And how do we make those decisions? And how do we document those decisions as well? So even the act of sort of setting the parameters of your and refinements of in your tool, those are intellectual acts. It's not just that you're plugging something in and expecting the computer to just solve all the problems for you. And in fact, the computer reveals a problem you maybe hadn't even thought about before. This question of, what is the significance of these particular words in the writings of Jane Austen? So thank you so much for sharing that.
Just a quick thought on that particular bubble cloud. If you don't filter out Miss and Mrs. and Mr., I thought it was interesting that Mr. and Mrs. were almost equal in size and frequency, when a lot of times, referring to, I would have expected men to be referred to more often than women, except in Austen, where the relationship between women is really rich. So a different novel in the same time period might have a very different gender play.
Right. So here you can start to see that by putting some text in Voyant, it's actually raising more questions for us. It's either confirming or going against some of our assumptions about a particular author or a particular genre. And it's leading us to want to do more digging, right? Like, it's a really good point and we don't really know. So let's dig into that a little bit more, either by doing more work in Voyant with Jane Austen's work, or pulling in a contemporary male author of hers, or maybe we start by comparing her to the Brontes or something like that. So there's so many different directions we can take. And that's just from a conversation about stop words. We haven't even really talked too much about the actual results beyond like the weighting of Mr. and Mrs. So you can start to see some of those affordances and possibilities, but I'm curious also for us to take a little bit more of a critical lens here and think about what are some of the drawbacks or problems of trying to use a tool like this.
I had a question about how Voyant works. The reason I'm taking this is I'm actually running a survey that's had a lot of response, enough that I don't think I could do decent text analysis on the free text fields by my, on 4,500 responses. So how does it handle information relationships that are more like in a column where you've got one respondent responding across a bunch of different questions? Obviously I could just look at the text of one question, but if I put the entire survey up, that relationship of information that would be side by side is different than in a truly linear text.
Yeah. That's a really good question, Kate. My understanding of the origins of Voyant is that it was a tool designed for humanists. So I think it's really document centric instead of survey response or tabular data. And there are other text analysis tools that are more geared towards that kind of analysis. And of course, I've just blanked on the name. I was going to say AmpCock, but that's more of a linguistics tool. So I would need to go back into my memory palace and find the answer to that. I just, on the spot, I just cannot come up with the word that I'm thinking of, so I apologize. But yeah, and that's, again, that goes back to the sort of figuring out what it is you have to work with, what is it you're trying to do, and finding the tool that best fits what you're trying to do. And it might not always be perfect, right? Like, we're always going to there's always going to be trade-offs with any approach that we take. So it's about being aware of those trade-offs and being transparent about them and understanding those limitations going in, so that we're approaching the results that we get with a degree of skepticism and digging in and not just accepting things at face value. And I see Alex put in chat, thinking about how many anti-colonial and anti-racist texts make use of AAEV or Indigenous non-Anglo language in select passage. I feel that this tool might possibly minimize the importance of phrasing or language that is used sparingly, not because it is unimportant to the text, but rather because despite how vital it is, there are publishing and consumer constraints that restrict the author from being more liberal with their implementation. Yes, and that is a fantastic point. Right, this tool was built for mainstream, originally just English language texts or in other languages. So it's going to have a lot of limitations. And the way that a lot of this work functions is that it's looking at the things that occur the most. So things that occur sparingly that might be placed strategically or for emphasis or something could get lost. And so it's a good reminder that these tools are good, but they're just tools and they can't really replace our eyes and our brains. And the way that we, in conversation with other humanists, develop arguments about texts. And Larry asks about a list of links for scholarship done with Voyant. And that is a fantastic question that I don't have the answer to. I don't know.
I just posted a link to, on Voyant's website, they have a gallery of uses. It's not all scholarships. Some of them are papers. A lot of them are blog posts. But it is a place to start in terms of solid examples of people who have used Voyant in doing kind of more complex analysis with it. So maybe start there and sort of read outwards for further examples.
Thank you so much. Again, I could not do this workshop without you. I see that we're at time. I've posted a few links in chat, including a link to a very brief survey of workshop feedback. Now, I know some of you are here because it's your class, but if you could take a few minutes to just fill this out, let me know how this workshop went, share ideas for future workshops. That'd be super helpful. And then also just putting my email in chat as well. I'm available. If there are specific questions that we didn't cover today, I'll go through the chat more closely and I can follow up. But if you have specific questions or you think you want to use Voyant, let me know, and we can always do a one-on-one Zoom as well. I'll be posting this recording to our Teaching During Quarantine website. And thank you, Brianne, for offering to answer more NLP or natural language processing questions, because I didn't actually take that class in library school. I took the InfoVis class instead. But thank you so much for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and that you remain safe and healthy. And I'm gonna stop the recording.